Welcome to the Engage podcast, brought to you by Boodle, the most rewarding way to pay. If you haven't already, get onto the App Store and download Boodle. That's Boodil. The Engage podcast is where we speak to some of the most inspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders. In today's episode, we are joined by the successful professional Mike Kent, the co-founder of Kitlocker, a business which provides sports and teamwear across the UK. He set the company up alongside fellow co-founder Tom Ward in 2005 after meeting at the England Volleyball setup. The business, which is now 18 years old, was set up during their university days in Sheffield and is now a 100-person operation on track to achieve revenues of over 20 million. Kitlocker runs over 500 sites, including some of the Oxford and Sheffield university sports teams, whilst also holding partnerships with the likes of Nike. Thanks for joining us today, Mike. And to kick things off, it would be great to hear a bit more about the company.
We're not typical e-commerce. We are part e-commerce and then part what's known as Teamwear. And Teamwear for us kind of represents almost like a just-in-time manufacturing. So we hold lots of Nike product on a shelf. Someone from Oxford might want football, their name, and a print on the back. We won't pre-print any of that because we work across thousands of different customers. So we must have millions of different customization setups. So we're constantly kind of, especially in peak, football season kicks off, education starts, all of the seasons kind of go live there.
Yeah.
You have this horrific peak into peak and you're going, oh shit. So you're kind of staffing for maybe, it was originally for about 2 or 3 months of the year. And what we've kind of tried to do is just extend that. So private schools come on earlier, for instance.
Yeah.
Cricket starts from January, February, and just try to get that kind of seasonality. The really interesting bit with the kind of competition for us is that everyone stayed relatively sort of single channel.
Yeah.
So there was never, we always kind of looked at this and there was never really any intent. We just sort of played it as we saw it, as daft as it sounds. And as soon as we saw the seasonality, you're like, we need additional markets, and the product ranges that we're accessing from most of our brands will allow us to do that. So let's work really hard on building cricket into our offering. Next.
Yeah.
And university is multi-sport. So when you look at some of the detail on this, but we now run 500 sites.
Wow.
But within that, there's probably kind of 2,000 or 3,000 different customers that will be shopping on these platforms. So some are merged. We kind of reference them as kind of generic clubs websites. So lots of clubs feeding into kind of categories on a single store.
Yeah.
But we started 18 years ago. You guys, and I say you guys, saying as I'm like a granddad, the kind of the sort of Shopify plug and play type situation.
Wasn't there?
But even now, we still wouldn't necessarily be able to kind of shift our business model because we need this engineering, like this production arm and this really complicated logistical stack that just takes a lot of development.
Yeah.
And it's the interesting bit for me because it's all the problem solving. But it then means when you kind of go in, can we embed a payment solution? You're going, technically yes, but the long answer is this takes a fair bit of work.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So yeah, it's kind of an interesting business model.
Yeah, amazing. So I mean, that kicks things off nicely in terms of like, what is the biggest challenge you face running a 100-person business like Kitlocker?
The current challenge at the moment is that we're faced with a lot of opportunity. And this doesn't really sound like a challenge, but we're active across 5 quite core channels to ourselves. So our business is technically multi-sport, but then we have additional channels. So we're active in grassroots sports, whether that's football, cricket, netball, etc., etc. We're active in pro sports, predominantly football, but cricket and rugby. We're active in education, so that would be private school and universities. And then we have a special ops kind of strand, so where we work with the Premier League, the FA, lots of different national governing bodies to deliver quite big projects or quite small projects, but they kind of work slightly differently to our core model. And then the final strand is our pure e-com piece. And all of these, bar the pro model, work together. So we use a similar stock holding. We use similar but slightly differentiated systems, etc., etc. And what we currently faced with at the minute is trying to create a strategy that will probably work for 3 to 5 years, navigating our relatively, we say complicated. It's nice. It's nice being out with experienced business people who kind of say, well, actually, that's not as complicated as you guys think it is because you're too insular.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out which of the different opportunities that we kind of see in front of us as the most important. And as soon as we lock into that, the fun then starts to get that communicated, to get the business shaped accordingly. So we have quite good clarity on 18 months.
Okay.
And then it becomes a little more hazy, 18 months to sort of 3 to 5 years.
It's on. Nice.
Yeah.
There we go, brilliant. So as well, like obviously, let's go back to the very beginning. 2005, obviously 18 years old now, like unbelievable. Amazing success along the way. But
Not me.
Yeah, you're only a few years older than that. But talk us through how the business came to be in 2005.
Okay, well, I guess there's two parts to this. There's the aspects of kind of startup, and then there's the sort of bit before. And the bit before starts, I guess, back in a quiet little village outside of Cambridge, which is where I'm from.
Nice.
And
What village is this?
It's called Willingham.
Oh, okay. Never heard of it. But
No, which is why I wouldn't generally mention
Yeah.
it. So it's, quite an obscure little, nothing of note, nothing interesting. But I guess that some of those key bits that were probably foundational bits that I would not have been appreciating at the time, but I had parents that were very sports oriented, so played lots of different types of sports, very encouraging to kind of get me into different sports. And that resulted in me playing a lot of football, a lot of cricket, whatever sports team was needed to be filled at school. You put your name forward. It wasn't a good sports college, or it wasn't a good sports school. But it kind of embedded a sort of passion for sport. And my mum is Irish and a very passionate Irish rugby and golf fan. So it emanates in some quite interesting sort of viewing of Six Nations, which she just gets really into it, which was kind of replicated when I played grassroots football. She would be on the sidelines. And
shouting and screaming.
Dare I say in the right way.
Yeah.
There's definitely a wrong way to do it, but it was great. And both mum and dad were good taxi drivers and really quite supportive of that sport. But they also played a very obscure sport called volleyball.
Okay.
And I say called volleyball. It's massive around the world, but in the UK it's not. And in that obscurity kind of sits opportunity. And I didn't realise it at the time, but and where this is kind of going is that it was quite quick to kind of get to representational level in volleyball. Mm-hmm. So whether that was south of England, and then the age of sort of 15, 16, it turns into sort of national England junior sort of setup. And the reason that this is kind of interesting is that this is the first point at which I met my co-founder.
Okay.
So we are brought together through a love of volleyball.
Nice.
Say love. Love's a bit of an interesting word. But we kind of immersed ourselves into the kind of training camps.
And who was this for? Which team did you meet at?
So this would be for England sort of full national.
Nice.
I profess to be the kind of weaker player out of the two of us, which is always
don't want to confess that. Yeah, not on this podcast.
Hopefully you can edit that bit out. But we kind of became friends, but it was almost like a north-south divide. So he was from the north, I was from the south. So lines were definitely in place. But the one bit with Tom, and I guess it's kind of true to type, there was a warning sign there and then an opportunity. So he would be the guy, or was the guy, that bounced around with a duffel bag full of, and this is back in 1999, 2000, so this is a long time ago, with hooky CDs. So a bag full of CDs, which I'm hoping that it's beyond the point at which there's a kind of legal ramification. But he would be talking to all of the other junior players, all the other senior players, to sell 3 CDs for a tenner.
Okay. Nice.
And the importance of that, I think, is almost that kind of entrepreneurial instinct. And we kind of got to a stage where we'd kind of, I say, graduated from that junior program, which is sort of 17, 18. And what then happens for players that wish to do so can could go to train in Sheffield.
Okay.
So they run a training program that's sort of side by side with the university. And Tom and his mum bought some accommodation in Sheffield, and there was 5 of us from the training camp, 4, plus another poor guy that wasn't volleyball. He had no interest in volleyball. He was our 5th housemate.
Lucky him.
Yeah. But we moved to Sheffield and we trained 2 times a day and we studied. I had enrolled on a sport business course.
Okay.
So my hours of study were far less than Tom's, who was an engineering student. But we kind of played volleyball, and where this becomes kind of pertinent back to almost that sort of 2005 point, for my second year module, I'm just trying to think back when it was, I was tasked with writing a business plan for a sports business.
Mm-hmm.
Going into it, there was no intention of setting up a business. It was just trying to pass the course. And again, this isn't confessional, but this is I have to be kind of honest with the story. But what we kind of saw in our involvement in the volleyball committee, because as part of university, it was quite a social thing.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's kind of good opportunity to I guess learn a bit, getting involved in committees, etc., etc. We saw huge failings in this line of work. So trying to pull together sportswear ordering for a university volleyball team. Back in the day, you're looking at checks bouncing,
Mm-hmm.
Working with suppliers that are incredibly busy because of the time of year. It was just shambolic. Everything went wrong.
Yeah.
It was just terrible. So the approach to this was just introducing e-commerce. And that sounds relatively par for the course.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2004, 2005, that, especially in that line of work, wasn't a thing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So we, as I was kind of getting through to graduation point, Tom turned around and said, should we give that second year module a kind of go? And we both looked at it and sort of, we saw nothing to lose as much as anything.
Yeah.
I was trying to kind of apply to some accountancy jobs, some really boring bits, dare I say. I'd applied to do my SEMA qualification, which is management accounting. And we kind of just set the business up.
Amazing. And when you first started it, was it called Kitlocker, or has it sort of changed over the years?
So there was no name for it on the business plan.
Okay.
And I guess the name probably came within the first couple of months. And I remember us being sat, and the interesting part of this is we were sat at our old student accommodation, which is a bit of an indicator as to when it was. But myself and Tom were just firing names back and forward, and it just came together.
Nice.
And it was a bit weird, but it was good. It was good. We just went, well, that's that done. Next, what's
Amazing.
the next problem?
So you've got the idea, you've got the business plan,
Yeah.
You've got a name. Where do you go from there? How do you get your first customers on board? Where do you go to first? And then obviously talk us through the next few years from graduation to actually going full time on this then.
Yeah. So I guess the kind of starting point is looking at why we set the business up.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw these inherent failings specifically in the university supply of product. It's quite intricate, and it's quite a difficult one now that we've got that 18 years of experience. We still see that it's the most problematic strand of our business. But within that, there's an awful lot of kind of problem solving. And I think that ingrained into the business is almost this desire to want to, I guess, create customer solutions that we're proud of, for want of a better term. Back in the early days, we didn't have e-com from the get-go, but what we did have was a black book of contacts as such. So through all of our sporting pursuits for the years and years that we'd been playing volleyball or different sports, we just turned to that.
Mm-hmm.
And in this industry, referral happens relatively quick. And it almost felt as though everyone wanted to say, well, they've got a friend that can do this. And it's quite a cottage industry, or especially was at the time. So it wasn't too difficult to make quite small scale sales, but that wasn't the underpinning business model we were looking at. So on the side, we were also working, and I remember getting a grant to help build a website.
Okay.
And we used, we were, I think because of the grant, we had conditions to use someone specific.
Okay. And where was this grant from? Sorry.
It would have been from, I'm not sure if it's the Chamber of Commerce,
Oh,
but
right,
one
okay.
of the
Yeah.
kind of
So it wasn't
associate bodies.
university, but it was,
No.
yeah, okay.
We found ourselves being kind of excluded from quite a lot of grants because we'd already started trading.
Okay.
So an awful lot of the time were, have you started to make sales? Yes. Well, you're not. We're not interested. And you're like, okay, that's a bit weird, but it was what it was. So we I remember having a few meetings with this guy who'd set up a relatively good-looking website for us, but I don't think he had any pedigree in e-commerce. So we're then going, well, can we sell products? And he's like, what do you mean sell products? It's like, okay, so we almost had to start again. And
It's a nice brochure site.
yeah, pretty much. And we're going, so we just want to be able to do that. And they went, no, we can't do that. And I think I think our naivety when we started up was really helpful. But it's on reflection, it's interesting to kind of try and make sense of stuff like past the point, I guess. But we went to our network, and we had a guy now who's working at a very interesting business who helped us set up on an open source platform, and he kind of showcased that, especially in tech, and because of the nature of a lot of the back end stuff that we needed to build, anything was possible. Mm-hmm. So we got him to help kind of take this site that had been built and skinned and build it in something that was actually going to be usable.
Nice.
And all I remember from the early days of our first customer for university into this e-com space was University of Sheffield.
Oh, amazing.
Really, really good guy that got us in there. Still a good friend, I'd say, and still very active at University of Sheffield. And they're our longest standing customer. But he took a bit of a punt on us.
Amazing.
And we just got things up and running.
Brilliant. Amazing. But I suppose we've got two sort of foundational questions then. You've come up with this idea, obviously you've got the name, and then you've got the potential contacts that you can go after. Where are you finding the suppliers?
Yeah.
You know, how are you going about that side of things? And then following on from that, I suppose then there's the obviously other challenges. You know, you've sold the first few products, and then you've got the site live. And then what was the sort of agenda after, you know, university, you graduate to you know, is this a full-time thing? I suppose what point were you at when you graduated as well?
Okay, so where to start? So Suppliers is an interesting one. And again, some of on reflection and some of the stories that there are in the business is quite cool. I remember driving out to one of the M1 service stations to meet, it was a really bizarre meeting, because there's no meeting space at
just in a car
station.
park. Yeah.
Like, quite literally, I'm trying to think exactly where it was. Maybe it was a hotel, to give it a bit more prestige. But it was, and I remember going on my own and being petrified, just thinking we really need some suppliers. And it was a room full of elderly Italian gentlemen who were really good guys, didn't speak a word of English, and then the English sales rep for one of our first brands, which was a company called Araya. Mm-hmm. So they're active in volleyball, but also football, etc.
Swimming as well, aren't they? Yeah, I think as well.
And they, I have no idea what questions they asked. I think they sort of thought, what on earth are you trying to do? And we kept getting back this, well, e-commerce will never work in this space. It was never something that kind of resonated too much with me, but I think Tom almost took that personally. You're trying to do e-commerce in this space, but there was 2 or 3 brands that we took who were all from Italy, very randomly, and were all multi-sport, which worked for the university side of things, who just said, let's kind of give it a whirl. Nice. At that time, there would have been no thoughts around a Nike or an Adidas, or a Puma or one of the bigger brands, because the bar would be too high. But they kind of came on further down the line.
So what were they, the suppliers then? You were ordering products based on what the university teams needed, and then were you printing the badges on and initials and that sort of thing as well? And who was doing the printing as well?
So this then kind of pivots to the other part of the story. So upon graduation, we must have been a few months into the business. Mm-hmm. We'd have probably started making sales. I can't remember too much. We'd maybe just building some of the kind of early foundation pieces. Tom and his mum sold the house that we were in, and we actually moved into our volleyball coach's upstairs attic.
Oh, nice.
So a big thank you to the guys that kind of housed us there. And we were quite literally doing that. So we would take an order, whether it was a football team or whoever it might be, I can't even remember how we'd have sold to them, because it would have been paper catalogue based. I want 12 of them, da 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 da. And we would be drop shipping and then printing and then probably driving it to whoever it was, or going down to the post office and sending it.
Nice. So you were doing the printing yourselves then?
Yeah, we'd be up until 2-3 in the morning for. The time blurs because it's probably something I've scrubbed from my
raised.
But we had these side by side bedrooms, and I remember falling asleep at a heat press at like 2 in the morning and waking up and going, we'd missed the deadline, and Tom had worked through and just gone, no, it's done, it's fine.
Wow.
But it was one of those where we kind of went into this not necessarily knowing whether this would work or not. And I don't say that this is a good way of approaching business, but it's there wasn't the pressures. So like, I have kids, mortgage, dog, all of that good stuff. But at the time, the prospect was, I need to find a job. I need to potentially move home, and this was like an opportunity to not have to move home. No disrespect to the mum and dad, but it was expensive down in Cambridge. Sheffield was much cheaper, but it was just a means of, I guess, doing something that seemed really quite interesting, but not quite sure whether this would take off or not. We had that naivety was really there. There was no kind of concept of this will do that. This is a market cap for that. It was just, let's just go. Let's take step by step and see what happens.
Nice. So let's talk about some of the key milestones over the first few years. Obviously, you've mentioned there at university, come up with the idea, developed out, first client, Sheffield University. What are the sort of key milestones over the next few years for the business, and what was the sort of growth and, sort of, I suppose, percentage growth, if you can sort of talk us through that roughly?
Yeah, I don't have the figures to hand in terms of the actual kind of the growth by year. But we did something recently with our senior team, which we actually shared across the business, of our growth curve from day one to current date.
Nice.
And it's really interesting because it looks as though we were doing nothing for about 10 years. And then it's like this hockey stick sort of curve, which is indicative of a few bits that kind of happened probably around the 10-year mark, that we really managed to leverage tech. We really managed to leverage supplier relations. And we kind of got things together, and it kind of, a lot of stuff fell into place at that point. But those first 10 years, there was never a point at which we didn't think it would work. So there's never a moment where we went, there's no forward momentum. But some of the kind of key bits, or the key sort of milestones of reflection, and again, the dates are a bit hazy, is we moved from attic to a residential property that we rented, and we worked out of that, which must have been within about 6 months. And then probably about a year later, we moved to our first unit, which I think was quite, I think that was the point at which we shifted to become a limited company as opposed to partnership.
Nice.
But it was the first point at which I think we kind of looked at this and said, we'd already had staff in place, but okay, this is getting a bit more interesting and a bit more real. I think one of the tipping points in our rented accommodation, where we were running the business early on, was the discussion of trying to get an embroidery machine up the stairs. And the bits of kit are quite noisy and quite heavy, and it was like, this just isn't going to happen. So we need to find a unit. And I think there's something in almost that stretching piece of we looked at the unit and went, we'll never fill this. Within 6 months, we'd filled it and probably popped out of the seams.
Wow.
Which has kind of happened ever since. So we've now moved 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
And they were probably some of the more seminal moments as we were in that kind of growth phase. But one of the really big bits on reflection was Nike, and I don't remember what year this was, but Nike kind of realised that e-commerce was really working in Teamwear. And it's a very small aspect of Nike's global business, but it's quite an important one. And they said that they'd really like to work with us. So we were really quite fortunate. And I remember bringing them to that unit, and it was almost like we had like a tree house, which was a mezzanine office. And it was just embarrassing. And our Nike rep came, and he's a good guy. And One of our workers is a 6'8" professional boxer at the time.
Oh, right. I thought he was going to say volleyball player with that height.
He was.
Oh, right,
he was
okay,
back in the day,
yeah,
but he shifted to boxing when he realised there's maybe some money in it. But his dad ran a cafe, and he bought round pie and peas, which is a Sheffield delicacy. It's not Sheffield, but Henderson's relish and all that sort of stuff. And our Nike rep was just like, this is just bizarre. So he left, and we were like, we've got no chance. This is never happening. So when a letter came through to say you've been given this Nike account,
wow.
I don't know if we realised quite how significant that was, but it was a massive unlock, customer unlock, huge. And what you kind of see in a lot of our competition that would be working with Nike, they're generally single market.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of their catalogue is kind of geared towards grassroots football. So a lot of the suppliers are just in grassroots football. We'd come at it from university supply predominantly, but as a multi-sport kind of flavour, so a lot of volleyball, a bit of grassroots football. So Nike saw benefit in us introducing e-commerce into grassroots football, but also how we could be leveraging some of their relationships that are not necessarily football. So we worked and we did the boat race in 2012, I think.
Wow.
So we kitted out Cambridge and Oxford. We signed Oxford University. We just picked up lots of interesting kind of customers at the time. And I've got, nightmares of being stood on the Thames with a van full of product. We were positioned really badly. It was just, our Nike guys came and just went, shame.
This podcast is brought to you by Boodle, the cardless payment solution which offers significantly reduced fees, instant settlement of funds, and eradicates fraud and chargebacks. Boodle can sit on your e-commerce checkout as an alternative payment solution, or can offer clients a fully customised payment portal to send out payment links. What's better is that Boodle rewards customers with redeemable points every time they check out. If you haven't already, get onto the App Store and download Boodle now. But at that point then with Nike then, what stage were you at in terms of how many universities were you covering? What sort of teams within the university? So, for example, Sheffield, you started with the volleyball team, then did it expand across multiple other sports? And did you cover the whole of the university sportswear or Sheffield, or was it just specific teams?
So I guess for University of Sheffield, what usually happens in our line of work with universities, and it's now maybe 10% of our business.
Okay.
So that's how spread we are, I guess. But the complexity is that you have almost a B2B relationship with the university,
mm-hmm.
and you'll agree a contract, and a lot of them will have quite tight procurement processes, which then gives you an unlock to all of the sports teams. Our product portfolio, even now, wouldn't stretch to some of the more, fringe sports. And I say fringe in terms of kit supply, so American football or ice hockey or ice skating.
Mm-hmm.
They will then generally use their own kind of suppliers. Okay. Or there's certain brands that will create kit that's not necessarily to the level that we wanted to represent, especially with Nike. They wanted full authenticity, so the product had to fit and do a purpose. It couldn't be they wouldn't allow us to do, but they wouldn't want us to kind of supply American football kit that wasn't the best possible product offering. But within that, we would be supplying to volleyball clubs direct.
Okay.
So outside of a university setting, and much the same with the grassroots football. All from the same product catalogue, all from the same kind of the sort of range as such. So you'd then have this B2B relationship, and then our online store would generally be set up to cater for Oxford's. I think they've got something like 10,000 different customisations.
Wow.
80 sports, however many colleges, 40 colleges, etc., etc.
Wow.
And that's then where this becomes complicated. But an awful lot of this is the sensible position that we took was, if we're working with 80 sports, most are using the same 10 products,
mm-hmm.
15 products. And you then kind of consolidate. When we look at some of the intricacies around kind of purchasing, you consolidate around that stock holding, mm-hmm. and you use it to service hundreds of platforms. It was none of this was evident when we started out.
Yeah.
But we learned quite quick.
I'm sure you did and evolved on the way.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I suppose for context, it would be really good to understand the business now, because obviously you mentioned the university side is only 10% of the business.
Yeah.
So I suppose, and I know we were talking about it before, but give us a whole idea and a whole picture of the business, how you operate now.
Yeah.
That's obviously completely different to when you first started.
So I guess it's interesting to note that the business model that we wrote in my second year at uni still underpins, as a percentage, I'm not sure, maybe 60 to 70% of the business.
Amazing.
So using a very reactive supply model to facilitate our core markets is still a big part of the business. What we've done in more recent times, this is where I kind of mentioned this almost shift of, we kind of trundled along and it felt as though we were busy, but there was a point at which it all fell into shape. We built out a kind of what we'd consider a relatively solid e-com proposition, so like a mainstream. Our point of difference from, I guess, the mainstream players in that sportswear space is that we're focused on teamwear. But nobody had really done it before that point. So there was an untapped market, one that we weren't sure how big that was going to be. But what it allowed us to kind of do was consolidate on these stock positions, because the volumes driven through that channel alone were quite significant. And what we've done since, I guess, is almost try to create definition around the channels we work in.
Mm-hmm.
So our grassroots sports model will look very similar whether we're supplying football or cricket. Or the importance of getting into cricket from football, because football is the biggest marketplace, was the seasonality. But we almost applied that across the board. So in universities, we then made a conscious decision to go into independent schools.
Okay.
They sit at a different time. They place less stress on our operational model. Really, really important, sort of relatively boring stuff. But for a balanced operational business that is almost centered around that back to school period, you needed to take workload away from that to grow it.
Yeah.
And then I guess more recently, so some of the bits with Nike have led to us working with some really interesting people, which has helped refine our e-commerce model. And I mean more the delivery of. So we do an awful lot of work with the Premier League, the FA, and lots of their kind of sponsors. So we got tasked with supplying 5,000 sets of kit to the entire grassroots football market.
Nice.
So this was an FA, Nike and McDonald's initiative.
Oh, wow.
We were asked whether we wanted to do it, and I think we looked at it operationally and went, oh God, this is tough.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily think we've got the space for it, but we can make this work from the tech side of it. So we did this, and this was back in, it must have been 2014, 2015, I think. And it created a project arm, and we didn't realise it. So falling in after that, the Premier League have done something similar around distribution of equipment and kit into primary schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we do lots of different kind of sort of smaller projects for quite a few different really interesting sort of, whether it's national governing bodies or sponsors of. But that's another sort of channel. So when we talk about 5 channels in the business, the one that's come the most recent is our kind of pro strand.
Okay.
It relies on a different model. So we are now kind of focusing on making our own product on the license with a couple of different sort of sports brands. And it creates this 5th model. So we don't make it easy for ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things when you look at some of the challenges of the business. So we bootstrapped an awful lot, and we were fortunate to be able to bootstrap because of the nature of the industry, relatively low margins, pretty much zero innovation for years and years. Mm-hmm. And we framed ourselves as kind of innovators in the marketplace. But everybody experiences the same challenges. That seasonality is a big thing, so spread it out. We then look at trying to stack, we refer to them as like strategic assets, so that what we do here in grassroots, we stack it with some of our competencies, and we build out a new strand for independent schools, for instance. Subtle change, maybe a different supplier plugged in, et cetera, et cetera. And that's almost the broad strokes of the business. You're going to ask me how that then sits. So grassroots would probably be, no, I'm going to get this all wrong.
Okay.
But it's not well balanced, but it's got a decent balance across those 5 channels.
Amazing, love it. So talk us through. You briefly mentioned it there about bootstrapping.
Mm-hmm.
So along the years, I believe you did take obviously you took the grant. And I believe you did take on some kind of funding. I did read an article, but I don't know whether that was for equity or whether that was a debt facility of about $250,000, was it, around there?
So I guess when we look at how we've grown the business in terms of the financing, so when I talk about the grant, I smile because it was probably 1,500 quid.
Oh, okay.
Which even with inflation and stuff is... but we bootstrapped the business, and we've taken loan or asset finance. And then through pandemic, we took kind of C-bills.
Okay.
And that was genuinely because we thought the business was going to topple over. But we've not released any equity. And it's a kind of interesting one. We've never really sort of looked at financing through PE. We've not really explored that too much. We've been very head down and very insular, and there's problems with that that we're sort of unpicking at the minute. But we probably dipped in to take predominantly loan finance that was available maybe 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
So we've taken in finance to grow, and it's always been to make a step change in the business, or predominantly, or to bring in a very specific bit of embellishment equipment, because it can be quite expensive machinery. But it was always with a view to saying we are going to enhance our proposition and kind of progress the business. Other than the C-bills piece, it was always, I guess, progressive financing. But I don't know whether myself and Tom could easily work with PE because we're so entrenched in what we do. It would be interesting. Interesting.
An interesting proposition to another conversation to have. And so talk us through, you mentioned that again there, the C-bills because of the pandemic. Talk us through that period of the pandemic, because I know obviously, as you've mentioned again, there was a bit of a challenging period, obviously for the majority of businesses, but yourselves, universities sort of closed down. There was no sort of sports on at all. So how did that impact your business then?
So it's probably one of the bits I didn't kind of cover in the origin story is that my parents and I've never kind of sort of talked about it too much. Both kind of suffered with stress and to some extent some kind of mental health issues. Both they're great parents. That it wasn't something that really affected my childhood, but I do think it's something that I've kind of come away from. And my partner would probably say something similar, that I don't deal with stress, but I don't want to have stress too much. And as daft as that sounds, it's also given me a real empathy for people with stress and especially in business. But it was the first time when everything shut down that I've ever questioned my kind of, I guess, mental fortitude, because it was as if there was nothing that could be done. So we were presented with all of our core markets shutting down. And our only saving grace with this, and when I talk about these channels, was that our e-com channel, which was our kind of mainstream plugin, actually picked up the workload. But in those first, the one poignant moment was when Sunak announced furlough, because up until that point, it was like there's nothing we can do. The revenue streams have stopped. We can't, we're going to run out of money pretty bloody quick. And once that dropped into place, it took a big
weight and pressure off. Yeah,
but it also didn't, because we were still presented with the same problem of everything being locked down. We didn't quite at that time realise that our e-com channel would have performed as well as it did. And Tom got back to his roots in terms of
going out and selling CDs.
But CDs were home. Remember that home exercise drive?
Nice. And
you'd be buying 20 kilogram weights for something like 8 times the price and going, that's a good deal. And you're going, this is just crackers.
I was one of those.
Well, no courier wanted to take them, so you'd be spending more on shipping anyway. But it gave us the opportunity to kind of pivot. And what I think one of the bits that we did, and on reflection, I think that going through the pandemic, we didn't lose the business, which was massive, obviously. We didn't really get close to losing the business, but it always felt at the time that, this could just be, this is it. Because if the markets don't ever come back, which you kind of think back and go, that was how I was feeling at the time. But the reflection on it is that the positive part of that was that there isn't going to be much else, and I say that with AI looming and all that sort of stuff, that will challenge the business to that extent. And you speak to people far wiser than I am, and they say that opportunity sits in those sorts of moments when everything's gone to shit. There's opportunity, and you kind of reflect and say there was. And a lot of our competitors very understandably panicked. We stayed sort of, and I say trading, we kept open our sales channels so that we could still be discussing with our customers, because they were still sat. And if I was a sports organiser for a grassroots football team, I still want to talk about that. So we almost kept the communication channels open as much as we could. It was hard because it wasn't generating any revenue, but the one kind of, I guess, crystal thought I had was, we can't just shut up shop. We need to maintain that contact, and God knows how long this is going to take to kind of come through, but we still need to be kind of here and present as such. But the e-com side of things just got a bit stupid, and that wasn't our brilliance. The only thing we did was just sort of, we shifted some of our pricing models because demand just went nuts.
Yeah.
And it was because supply chains had gone to absolute, they
chaos,
just died.
Yeah.
And when our biggest suppliers are having that much of a problem, you're going, there was opportunity. And again, fair play with Tom. I think he kind of saw it, and we bought quite well through the pandemic. And our model is very reactive. We're not, whilst we are a futures-based business, which means we buy in advance, we also trade, we almost day trade because there's the ability to do so. A lot of the bigger brands weren't quite so nimble in that sense. They still did incredibly well. But we were creating opportunities from, like the entire kind of marketplace had cancelled all their futures. So all of these, the bigger suppliers were saying, well, there's lots of inventory. Which created some opportunities as such.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad to see that, you've progressed since then, and things keep getting, better and better, which is great to see. But let's talk about that hockey stick moment. So you mentioned, obviously, along the years was probably 10-year period where there was some good growth, but then there was that significant hockey stick curve. What would you say the sort of pivotal moments were for that, meteoric rise, really?
So I put it down to three things. One was leveraging tech.
Okay.
So we had something of a breakthrough in our tech, which changed the speed at which we could process orders. And again, because we didn't have an out-of-the-box solution, we self-built a lot of our kind of tech stack. It was a breakthrough that just made the efficiency and the operational side of things much easier. So we had the confidence that we could scale up in a very, very hard to handle marketplace. So like trying to apply logos to product in flight is fraught with difficulty and fraught with kind of with problems, and it needs a very good system to control it. So that was one breakthrough. At the same time, we really started to kind of leverage those relationships. So Nike especially, Adidas, and we used their popularity in the marketplace to really help to drive the business forward. So I think we went from 6 universities to 15, and that was similar in the different kind of marketplaces. They pushed us into some of these relationships with these bigger organisations, and really wanted us to sort of open up that e-commerce piece. I don't think we were entirely aware that we were being pushed as much as we were.
Yeah.
But it was just a case of going, yep, we can do that. Let's plug it in and go from there. I'm struggling to remember the third one. Yeah. There was a third, but I'm just trying to... I'm struggling.
The pivotal moments, those two, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and you talk about technology and, how you've utilised it in the business for your e-commerce proposition. I suppose the next question I've got is more about the future in terms of what is the sort of type of technology that is on the horizon for the business that will be used across, for future years, talking about AI and things like that you could see really having the sort of next big impact in years to come for Kitlocker?
So it's interesting because whilst we have a mainstream e-commerce piece to our business, we also have logistics, operations, production. So there's really, really interesting tech that's emerging in all of those more manufacturing, core manufacturing pieces. That's part robotics, underpinned by AI potentially. So some really incredible, I guess, efficiency benefits to the business, which, yes, it drives efficiency, but also gives a far more scalable model and opens up some of the opportunities that we've kind of potentially got in front of us. On the more core e-commerce stuff, we never consider ourselves at the very forefront of e-commerce per se, because of its nature within our business and because of our resource allocation. But we are already starting to use, we've already got plugins that are kind of AI drivers into our business, so product recommendations and that sort of tech that's coming through. But some of the bigger stuff, we're already starting to leverage some of the AI pieces, and whether they're almost in this caddy style of speeding up whatever process it is. I was chatting with our design team earlier, because we sit with such a broad stream of customers. How do we use some of the tools that's coming out in that visual software generation to create kind of, if you could create the best campaign for a grassroots football team, you can do it now. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And whilst I don't think that they're the transformational pieces per se, they'll definitely help. And I don't know whether for a business like ourselves, it'll be more iterative. There'll be little steps that we take, but our development team are speeding up their kind of coding. It's really fascinating to kind of see the speed of that, but it's one, obviously the kind of rhetoric at the minute is that there's big dangers ahead. Yeah. And I get that. But it's one of those where
you keep
difficult.
one eye on it, but at the same time you've got to be laser focused on your business. Yeah, so nice. So sort of coming to near the end, last sort of few questions. One is, what is your 5-year plan? And obviously I know you mentioned before that you can see sort of 18 months ahead of you, and that's where you plan. But what is the 5-year plan, not only for the business but also yourself personally as well?
Now you're asking a difficult question. And I think part of this is in my own character, that there's the prospect of personally thinking 5 years in advance scares me. And I don't know why that is. I need to really figure that one out. I could do sitting probably in front of a psychologist at some point. For the business, what we're being presented with some of the opportunities, we need to create a plan to understand which opportunities to take, because the focus now is really quite important, I think, because we're looking at a few quite big opportunities that would be really quite resource intensive. And if we pick the wrong ones or we choose not to do something, we have to be really quite certain on that. So it's quite interesting that I guess the next 2 months we should have much more clarity on that. It's probably going to take longer than that, but the 5-year plan, I think that it would be great to have a 5-year plan and have the intent and the not so much the vision, but more so the direction to go, this is where we want to be in 5 years. But the pace of change in the business until this point has been relatively kind of fast. And part of my fear for setting course for something very big and very specific is, if we'd have done that earlier on, we might have moved faster, don't get me wrong. But I think we'd have also precluded ourselves from certain opportunities that we may not have taken. And working with the likes of Nike, it's quite interesting because they would say, if it's not on the strat plan, we're not thinking about it. And I've got an awful lot of time for that. I think we've taken some calculated risks and kind of gone, strategically, we know that we're trying to shape the business to be less seasonal, But actually, if something comes into focus that we think could be really quite good, or we might have just been bored on that Friday morning, it pops into an email. I kind of say that slightly tongue in cheek. We've had the flexibility to kind of accommodate it, but we're seeing now that we're getting to a level in the business where we need to be far more kind of mature about this. And I say that with myself and Tom about these are decisions we want to take, because the key thing for me is that it gives great clarity to our teams because they know what we're trying to go for. I've really not answered your question though.
No, I like it. No, you've given a wide context and narrative. I like it. And to wrap things up, one question we always sort of ask to wrap everything up is, let's say, go back to being that young guy at university. There's lots of, boys and girls out there who are university or even just, sort of coming out of school, etc., who are looking to set up a business. Obviously, e-commerce is booming at the moment. Everyone's, with the low barrier to entry, Shopify, etc. It's now easier than ever to set up. But you've had a great career, 18 years so far. What's that one piece of advice that you'd give that person looking to set up a business, whether it is e-commerce or even just a, sort of a general business, really?
I guess there's two bits to kind of preface. One would be, I want to caveat this talk by saying I don't necessarily think that this is a blueprint. Mm-hmm. How we've done things is a blueprint that would work. The bootstrapping piece was something we could do because the sort of the market we went into. So on the basis that I'm talking to someone that's got good product or good service and a relatively good market fit, there'd be the one key piece of advice. There's probably two. One would be, we were quite insular as a business. So we were very focused internally. And our senior team now is predominantly made of people that have come through the kind of Kitlocker ranks and taken quite senior positions. Culturally, that is brilliant. And we've got a phenomenal team. The excitement for me comes when we expose them to people outside of the business who have much more experience than I do, mm-hmm. or Tom does, to mentor, or whether it's consultant. The speed of learning is great. We know we've got a great team of culturally sort of, I say, correct people. You know what I mean?
People that fit into the business that you want to be, and good values, good ethos.
And I guess in that, and that goes as much for me and Tom as it does for anyone else in our business, that we felt we had quite a complicated business. But as soon as I've kind of stepped out of our Kitlocker domain, and you chat to a few people in different walks of life, you kind of like, it's not that complicated, which in that is quite cathartic. It's mm-hmm. quite a nice thing to go, oh, okay, cool. But actually the learnings that can be taken from people that have done some really, really interesting things, I think that's one of the most important pieces.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Love it. Brilliant. Well, there we go. Like, amazing story. And congratulations on the success so far. And thank you very much for joining us.
Well, Harry, much appreciated. It's been great to come down and kind of share the story.
Amazing. Brilliant.
Thank you.